Hello, my name is Protik Mukhopadhyay. I'm an entrepreneur and an author. I'll be hosting the Reimagine Sales Systems podcast, where I'll be bringing some of the industry thought leaders who will be sharing their go-to-market strategies for their business systems. All right, everyone. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming Arvind with me, Arvind Sathyamoorthy. He's the Senior Director of Product Management, Commerce and Integrations from 8x8. Thank you, Arvind, for your time.
Likewise, good chatting with you, Protik.
So, Arvind, can you talk? You're welcome. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about your journey into the enterprise world? How did you get into this role? If you can share that with our audience, that we really appreciate it.
Sure. So just from a historical perspective, right? I started my career itself in the enterprise world, focused on building equipment leasing systems on the financial services sector. Right. I used to work for a boutique consulting firm called ThoughtWorks, who've since been acquired by a UK-based company. This was many years ago, right? And that's where my journey started, primarily in the B2B space, building systems for companies like Cisco and Data Commercial Clear and stuff like that. So Cisco Capital, right? And since then, from there on, I moved into Symantec, where I was doing e-commerce, primarily focused on B2C. But as the journey at Symantec evolved, we started within the e-commerce space itself. We started expanding into our small and medium business cloud offerings and product offerings, and that's what started my initial journey into the B2B side of the world, right? But my real change into complete B2B or largely into B2B came about at Malwarebytes, and at Malwarebytes I was the enterprise architect and the director responsible for e-commerce and digital solutions, both for our B2B and B2C space. But in the B2C space, we basically used a third-party vendor to help us go to market, and we used technologies from the third-party vendor to get there. But in the B2B space, it was pretty much all, I don't want to say homegrown, but essentially sales assisted, which was basically using the Salesforce CRM and other in conjunction. And that's what started my primary journey into the B2B space. And since then, of course, some Malwarebytes, I moved on to 8x8, and I've been doing it at 8x8 for a little bit at this point in time, for the last 2.5 years.
Thank you. That's a quite an eventful journey. Thank you, Arvind, for sharing. Obviously, you're looking at monetization systems. You're looking at go-to-market systems. Can you share a little bit, whatever is publicly available about your company's go-to-market strategy? And obviously, the related thing is, how does your team enable those sales motions?
Sure. So at 8x8 itself, specifically, our go-to-market strategy revolves around both direct and channel, right? When I say direct, it's obviously direct to customer, both from a sales assisted perspective and an e-commerce perspective. And then when we start talking about channel, there's the concept of both the wholesale channel and the partner channel. And when I say wholesale, it's really your distributors, right, and so on. But then there's a large component also, and it's very specific to the industry that I'm in. I know I haven't seen it necessarily in all other industries that I've been worked in, but there is a significant amount of partner-driven leads, right, which convert to accounts, and that's a pretty large component, because there is a lot of partnerships in the telco world historically, and that has led to creating that whole partner-driven ecosystem, which is not a wholesale, but really an affiliate or a partnership model.
Thank you. That's a very interesting model. So when you're channel or partner driven, what systems have you deployed, and how are you looking? Is your team seeing the value in doing some of those?
Sure. We've deployed, multiple different systems in 8x8 itself, right? I mean, our primary CRM is Salesforce, right? That's what we're using, and therefore the adjacent partner element with Salesforce is obviously Partner Exchange, which is a Salesforce product, and that's one of the things we've deployed. In addition to that, we've deployed, multiple other partner-related tools, both from a tracking perspective, selling, commission, so on and so forth, without necessarily getting into any specifics. In terms of tools itself, there's a lot that plays into the ecosystem on one end from a lead tracking perspective to tracking that to the account and the sale on one side, and then on the other end to the whole commissioning process where you've got to pay all these partners commissions, right? Both one-time commissions for bringing the deal in, and then residual commissions on an ongoing basis, because telco is like a utility. You use it, you pay for it every month, you keep consuming it on an ongoing basis, and therefore there's an ongoing subscription revenue either on a monthly basis, an annual basis, and then so you end up paying residual commissions to the partners. So all of those things come into play, uh, you know, in terms of building not just the tracking, but also in terms of figuring out whether you pay partners on invoicing, you pay partners on billing, you pay partners on cash collected, etc.
Very interesting.
Right.
Very interesting.
And whether you pay them commissions for subscriptions, for usage, for consumption, given that all of those models are in play.
Right. No, and I think telco has in a way been a pioneer, because a lot of the usage-based, which is sort of the what we call the subscription 2.0, has been driven by these consumption models that pioneered by telco. So I think it's a very interesting model, and obviously partner consumption is related to that. So what about internally? Like we have a lot of practitioners listening in, solution managers, business analysts. Now that you have defined the systems and you have partnered with a product vendor to implement, how do you ensure that the actual end users are using it? What are some of the adoption and the best practices that maybe in your recent projects that you have enabled to meet some of those goals?
See, one of the key elements that comes to deploying such a complex system as ours is there's a lot of training and enablement involved. It's one, a telco product usually is pretty complex on its own. That's number one, right? And so the focus is on how do you simplify that? How do you make sure you build all the guardrails that are needed to make sure that your sales team can go to market effectively and perform the selling motions effectively without having to do a lot of errors, and which means that you have a customer sitting on the phone and you're making mistakes, and you want to avoid that. It means you've got to make sure that is an easy process. And then two, you want to make sure that you avoid a lot of rebooking. So you've got to keep the systems flexible to a point where as the customer changes their mind going through the process, you're able to support those changes all the way downstream till, should I say, even a deployment, right? Because until the customer is deployed, they may not necessarily know what they want, or the business might evolve, right? A deployment might take a little while because everybody's already got a telco system in place, and now here you are ripping and replacing it with something else, and it's going to take a few months.
Right.
It's not another thing, right? You're not ripping and replacing systems that are overnight. You're basically changing something that's very primary to them doing business. And so you've got to provide the flexibility to those customers all the way to the time that they're actually deployed and using the product, not just to the point where you've sold it.
Yes, exactly. In terms of 2021, it's a very interesting year. We are coming out of COVID. Are there any initiatives that your team either prioritized or deprioritized because of COVID? And what has been your experience in like looking at different options to do transformations and prioritizing those?
Sure, great question. And here's something that happened, I should say, when COVID started, which was pretty important. See, everybody started working from home.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Most companies did not have any concept of a remote workforce.
Yes.
Even if they did, it was a marginal remote workforce, and most probably all you thought about was a collaborative space for meetings and no more. And again, keep in mind, right? You live in Texas, I live in the Bay Area. You used to live in the Bay Area, Protik, right? And technology in the Bay Area is vastly different from technology in other parts of the country.
I agree.
Right. I'm sure with your move to Texas, you've kind of come to realize that.
Yeah.
Right. And so sitting here in the Bay Area and saying, hey, everybody is already online using things in the cloud is most probably a very, should I say, very myopic view of the world. Right. I mean, I remember my days at Semantic, right? When we did our use cases for building e-commerce, our favorite analogy was, what would somebody who's 60 or 70 sitting in Kansas do as they go through the purchase process online, as opposed to somebody sitting in the Bay Area where we are building the systems and everybody understands technology much better, right? And so that's kind of the same with the world. But kind of going back to your question, right? So what changed with COVID, right? Everybody needed a remote workforce. Everybody needed communication tools that were online that they could that they could put their employees on, right? And also be able to interact well with their customers. And so that vast switch or that serious switch to supporting and enabling a remote workforce became fairly important, right? And given where 8x8 plays with both not just the unified communications world, but also the contact center side of the world, which is used for customer support and so on, those became prime products. And we had to make programs together that would easily enable customers to switch from their, on-premise phone systems to be able to quickly switch across to a cloud-based phone system without them losing their phone numbers, without them having to redo their IVRs and things of that sort, right? And that was one of the things that we put together. And on my team itself, what we had to do is we had to make sure that our sales teams were able to quickly take that and sell that in the market, right? Now with the pandemic dying down, obviously things are changing a little, but one thing you've got to also keep in mind is you've got now a large number of customers shifted to the cloud, right? And there's a lot more flexibility in terms of where people are going to be working from and things of that sort. So infrastructure becomes pretty key, right?
Agreed. Right.
Having a high scalable system, having good uptime, reliability, all of those things have become fairly important, right, over the course of the last year or so.
Exactly. No, those are good insights. Let's talk a little bit about project management and basically how do you take some of your, let's say, concepts and ideas into execution when you're doing these sort of cross-functional complex projects? Are there any best practices that you would recommend if somebody is looking at, let's say, a full stack implementation of quote to cash? So the way they do their orders, the way they collect the cash, the way they are configuring the systems, and it involves so many stakeholders: finance, product, sales. How would you sort of structure the project? Any best practices?
Yeah. The funny story I'll share with you, right?
Sure.
Whenever I'm asked about who my stakeholders are, I choose to answer about who my stakeholders are not. And my answer is usually
it's a smaller list, right?
Yeah, it's usually facilities is not my stakeholder.
Right.
HR is usually not my stakeholder. And that's pretty much it. That's where the list ends.
Right.
And so when you take up a complex initiative of that sort, which is going to be extremely cross-functional, first you've got to change it, break it down into bite-sized chunks, right? I'm working on a transformation roadmap right now, and when you take QTC and try to transform QTC as a whole soup to nuts, it's pretty hard, right? There's multiple pieces in it. If you just look at QTC from the top down, you've got everything starting from the catalog and pricing, right? Going through your quoting and ordering flows, down into contracting, subscriptions and asset management, order management, subscriptions and asset management, billing, payments, right? And when you do something like a telco, you've got usage models, consumption models beyond just subscription, and then you've got the whole accounting, GL, ERP, posting, subledger, booking piece, right? And then lastly, you've got beyond that, which starts stepping into things like commissions, internal commissions, external commissions, and so on. And commissions usually is not seen in the QTC world, but it is a result of what happens in the QTC world. And same thing with BI and reporting, right? You can't measure the success of your full QTC world unless you've got all those pieces in place, right? So first steps obviously going to be to break it down to bite-sized chunks, figuring out where your low-hanging fruits are, which you can deliver quickly, but also what have the highest value from an impact perspective, right? And many times things with a high value usually are more complex items,
Correct.
And so finding that balance, breaking it down to bite-sized chunks, being able to say, hey, which teams am I moving off or onto the new systems, right? Or do they have to run two parallel processes for a significant amount of time? And how long does that have to go on for? All plays into figuring out how you structure it, right? I remember doing a transformation at Malwarebytes, and it was about a year long when we swapped out one coding, ordering, and billing system for another, right? And as we did that, one of the key ways we did it was we moved our smaller SMB sized businesses on into the new platform before we went into the enterprise, or even we did US before we went international. We did direct before we did the wholesale. And so and it was first putting net new customers on it before we started migrating existing customers, right? And so every company is going to have to make a decision in terms of how you structure it, right? When I'm doing it at 8x8, it's very much driven by what are the current goals, right? And I can just tell you on the roadmap that I'm working on, I'm most probably in the third or fourth iteration of that roadmap. And the reason I'm also in the third or fourth iteration of the roadmap is simply because company goals have changed over the last year and a half. Right. And so if you try to do this big bang approach without a real roadmap, you're not going to have a lot of flexibility in moving things around. Right. And that's why the product management practice becomes fairly important, because now you've got to say, hey, how can I lay these out in a sequence that actually makes sense and deliver value? Not just how the heck do I deploy this to production. Right. And then on the backside, you're going to have to go measure it. And if you've got a roadmap that's a couple of years long, 2-3 years long, then the next question you got to ask is, hey, how is the company evolving? How is the market evolving? Right? Are policies and practices that we have in place today still going to be relevant 2 years from now? Do we still want to do business the same way? Right? And that's where a lot of organizational change management and business process work comes in, right? I mean, as an organization, do you still want to be doing these things 2 years from now? Or do you want to go to market in a different way, right? How do you keep that flexible? Or are your business processes good enough to continue, or are there more things that you can automate, that you want to automate, which you can make less error free, right?
Right.
And that whole sequence of things gets into figuring out how the heck do you organize your project.
Your business has to go on, and sales has to happen, and you still have to do the transformations in parallel.
Awesome. I mean, do you remember this EDS ad from the late 90s where they were building a plane while flying it?
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. You have to build it, and then by the time you land, hopefully the plane works.
Yeah, well, you're going to fly it while you build it, right? You've got sales running while you're still transforming the whole thing.
Inside. Arvind, we're almost at the end of our conversations. I want to ask you something more personal. So let's imagine somebody early in their career, somebody who's a business analyst, they're trying to find their way in the enterprise world. What advice would you give them? Like, if they have to at some point of time manage a team like you, or get into a role like you in a leadership role, what are some of the advices you have for somebody starting their career either on the IT side or on the consulting side?
See, the one thing that you need to figure out is, where do you want to go long term? Right? I see a lot of people who want to become solution architects, but they start getting into business analysts.
Right.
And the reason for that is because a lot of business analysts today tend to also spend time configuring systems, especially in more of a cloud native world.
Correct.
Right? And they see that as a path to heading towards a solution architect. Right? And a solutions architect role is a little bit more than that, right? You're not just talking about configuring systems, you're also talking about building systems. Right? So that's one mistake I'm going to caution people against, right? See, the second thing that you're going to look at, especially from a career perspective as you grow, is when you start your career, you're focused a lot more on the hard skills. When you progress your career, you need to be a lot more focused on your soft skills.
Yeah.
Right? And you've got to find that mix, right? At the beginning, you might be 100% hard, 90% hard skills, 10% soft skills. Right? But as you progress your career, you want to make sure you're switching things the other way, right? It's got to go 60-40, 40-60. Maybe it's got to go 90-10 eventually. Right? And that's a progression you've got to figure out how you make. Because a lot of people tend to get stuck because they don't progress their soft skills. I'll give you a simple one, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you start taking ownership of what you do,
Right.
and maybe even beyond what you do, right? That's when your progression will come easier.
Mm-hmm.
That's a simple example of something that most people don't do or find it very hard to do.
Yeah.
Right? They like to operate in the space that they operate in, and that's the end. Right? But if you're really looking to say how the heck does this whole thing work together,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna have to start looking at things end to end and stop saying I'm only doing order management
Right.
or I'm only doing catalog management. Right? How the heck does your catalog impact commissions? I mean, it's at the extreme end of this process.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't know how your catalog impacts commissions, you're never going to get the breadth. And if you don't get the breadth, you're never going to take ownership of what you do completely. You're basically saying, I'm going to do this and throw it across the wall and hope it sticks. And people don't see value in that.
Right.
I mean, you've got to find a way to grow value and add value. Until then, you're not progressing.
Right. I think that tying up to the value and the ability to communicate, I think those are really interesting things. Thank you for sharing this, Arvind. Appreciate that. With that, I would like to thank Arvind again for his valuable time. Lots of insights about your journey, as well as some of the ways you're managing complex projects, and then definitely the insights you shared about how people can manage their career has been really helpful. So thank you, Arvind, for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Protik.
So with that, I would like to wrap up this podcast. Thank you all for tuning into Reimagine Enterprise Sales Systems. To listen to more exciting podcasts, please visit my website, protikm.com or protikm.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and other channels that you follow so that you'll never miss your show.